Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Ellie Richardson and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. Tonight we turn to a new and largely uncharted strategic frontier, the ocean floor, as demand for critical minerals accelerates, driven by electric vehicles, renewable energy and modern defence systems. Governments and companies are looking several kilometres below the surface into waters few humans have ever seen. Deep sea mining promises access to cobalt, nickel and rare earth minerals, materials central to the technology advancement. But it also raises profound questions about environmental damage, global governance and strategic competition, particularly as China dominates critical mineral procession. Joining me now is Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and a leading expert on security and modern deterrence. She leads the Modern Deterrence Project at RUSI in London and has written extensively on how economic, technological and environmental domains are increasingly shaping global security. Thank you so much, Elisabeth, for joining us here today on Focal Length. My first question to you is, deep sea mining refers to extracting critical minerals like cobalt, nickel and rare earth minerals from the ocean floor, often several kilometres below the surface, resources that are central to electric vehicles, renewable energy and modern defence systems. Is this race for seabed best understood as an environmental dilemma or as a strategic competition driven by fears of supply chain dependence, particularly on China?
So there are several things combining or clashing here, or several factors. The indisputable fact is that these polymetallic nodules on the seabed, particularly in the deep sea, so at several kilometers depth, have extraordinary riches in minerals. So things like cobalt, copper, nickel, but also rare earths. And that has been known for generations. And the question is, should and can humanity mine them? And now that we need more minerals to, for example, manage the energy transition to greener economy, greener energy, which requires, for example, these sophisticated batteries, these minerals have become more attractive. And in a number of countries that are trying to become less dependent on China, less dependent on rare earth processing in China, this has come to be seen as an enormous opportunity. But it is the seabed is a global commons. The oceans are a global commons. They are managed by the International Seabed Authority, and that's where the decision has to be made, and will be made, whether deep sea mining should take place. And those deliberations have been going on for years, because it's very difficult to decide if so, under what conditions these nodules should be mined, because we just don't know with any kind of certainty what the long-term ecological consequences would be to the seabed. And we also don't know exactly how to equitably distribute this wealth on the seabed among the world's nations. In other words, who should get the right to mine these nodules commercially if we decide to go ahead with it?
Much of the global focus is on the Clarion-Clipperton zone in the Pacific, an area roughly the size of Europe that holds vast mineral deposits, but also fragile ecosystems we barely understand. From a security perspective, what makes this particular zone so geopolitically sensitive, and why are major powers willing to push ahead despite scientific uncertainty?
So the CCZ or CCZ, if you use American pronunciation, has a very significant volume of polymetallic nodules. So these nodules exist across the world's oceans, but the concentration is particularly strong in the Clarion-Clipperton zone, or the CCZ, and that has made it extremely attractive for deep sea mining, and under the International Seabed Authority's auspices, deep sea mining is carried out on an exploratory basis, so in other words, research basis, by a number of countries or companies in different countries, and they do so with an ISA license. That is, for example, the case with India. But now what is happening is that the United States has decided to unilaterally license companies to mine the deep sea, and that will primarily be the Clarion-Clipperton zone, because it has these large amounts of nodules, and the complications are that this, as I mentioned, is being done on a unilateral basis by the United States. And then other countries, especially China, are likely to say, well, if the United States goes ahead on its own, we'll go ahead on our own too. And if you mine on the seabed on a unilateral basis, you're doing so essentially without an international agreement about where each company can mine and under what conditions. And that is the really perilous situation we are in right now. The United States having gone ahead with unilateral licensing. We don't know yet when China might act, but it is essentially a deep sea arms race in the making.
China already dominates the processing and refining of many of the minerals needed for the green transition, and its state-backed firms hold long-term exploration contracts in international waters. Is deep sea mining primarily an attempt by Western countries to break China's chokehold on critical minerals, or does it risk reinforcing Beijing's early mover advantage?
The really paradoxical thing about these US moves or efforts is that, yes, it is an effort by the United States to reduce its rare earth dependence on China. But there is no company in the United States that says it can mine rare earths in the deep sea. And so the company that has applied for a US license under this new regime will only be mining things like, or extracting things like copper and cobalt from these nodules. It will not be extracting rare earths. And there is a simple reason for that, that is that it's extremely difficult to extract rare earths from anything, and China dominates that processing. So the United States is not going to get rare earths from the seabed, from the deep sea, in any kind of near future. And so that makes the whole thing so paradoxical. What it will get, if this effort succeed, is cobalt, nickel, copper, but these are metals that can be mined terrestrially at low cost, so you don't need to go to the seabed to mine those. And that is where we are at the moment. But I think that so that's the first paradoxical aspect, and the second paradoxical aspect is that China still dominates rare earth processing. So regardless where where other countries find the rare earths, if they are going to make themselves less dependent on China, they'll have to set up rare earth processing in their countries, and that is extremely dirty. And that's why countries have relied on China to do it for so long. So if you're going to make yourself less dependent on rare earth processing in China, you will have to tell your citizens, we are going to do it in our country, and it's going to be extremely dirty.
The United States, meanwhile, is not even a signatory to the UN treaty governing deep sea mining, yet it quietly supports private companies pursuing extraction technologies. Does this undermine Washington's credibility when it argues for rules-based order at sea, or is this simply realism catching up with idealism?
Yes, so the treaty governing deep sea mining is the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is the constitution of the oceans. The United States has not signed or ratified UNCLOS, but has signed something called the Implementation Protocol, which concerns deep sea mining. And so what the United States has done for all these years, that has not been a part of UNCLOS, is that it has followed the rules of UNCLOS, because America benefits from a maritime order just as much as every other country does. But with this executive order, it's essentially saying we don't care about UNCLOS, and or we don't feel ourselves bound by UNCLOS. And there's a long, massive, in fact, legal debate going on about customary international law and whether the United States is bound by UNCLOS because it hasn't rejected it completely over the years. In fact, it has massively benefited from it, including the protection afforded by UNCLOS. So either way, what this means is that this is the first time the United States has essentially openly said, we are going to do something that is in direct defiance of UNCLOS. And the United States government will say, well, we haven't signed UNCLOS, we can do as we like. But that essentially puts the United States outside the maritime order created by UNCLOS, and it also undermines UNCLOS, which in the longer term and even the shorter term will be to the detriment of the United States itself, because shipping to and from the United States, carrying cargo to and from the United States, all of that will be affected by deteriorating maritime order.
The International Seabed Authority was created to regulate mining in international waters, but critics argue it is moving too quickly and is overly influenced by mining interests. In your view, is the ISA acting as a genuine global regulator, or are we seeing the early stages of regulatory capture in a domain that lacks meaningful enforcement?
I think most mining companies or deep sea mining companies complained about the International Seabed Authority is that it's moving too slowly. They wanted to start issuing commercial licenses or licenses for commercial deep sea mining, but international diplomacy is slow and it is deliberate. Almost every country on this planet has signed UNCLOS, which means that all those countries are part of the International Seabed Authority. They have a voice. There has to be, and there already is, intense negotiation about whether and how to permit commercial deep sea mining. And that is international diplomacy, and that is necessary because we are talking about the seabed, which belongs to all the countries on the earth. That is why it's taking so long. And it's also taking long because science has to catch up. Science has to establish what effects commercial deep sea minings will have in the short term and the longer term on marine life. And that is not an easy task to accomplish, because we're talking about life several meters below the water surface. So there's a lot of research that has to happen before we can know with certainty what effect commercial deep sea mining will have on life in the oceans and on the oceans themselves.
More than 800 marine scientists have called for a moratorium, warning of irreversible ecosystem damage and consequences we may only understand decades later. From a deterrence and security standpoint, how should governments weigh long-term environmental harm against short-term strategic and economic pressures?
This is an age-old question. How do you weigh the greater good of the planet against the interests of, for example, companies within your own country? And I think over the years, many countries have come to the conclusion that when it comes to issues concerning the entire planet, you have to act together. That's why we, for example, have the COP summits regarding climate change. And that is a very good thing, because if each country goes ahead on its own, it can destroy the planet to the detriment of everybody else. But when it comes to these issues, we really have to work together. And scientists are furiously conducting research to try to figure out the effects of commercial mining in the deep sea. And in other areas as well, but most of the nodules are in the deep sea. It will take time, but they are already so concerned that they have issued a moratorium calling for commercial mining not to be introduced in the near future, simply because we don't know yet how extensive the damage to the oceans will be. And it's not just scientists who have called for a moratorium. It's also 40 countries, including most of Europe and a few other countries. So that there is significant concern about what commercial mining will do to the seabed. And we should remember that the International Seabed Authority is the authority that has the right to regulate this mining. So we have an international body that has been put in charge of regulating deep sea mining, and virtually all the countries of the earth are members of the International Seabed Authority and can help can articulate their interests there. What I would say is I hope that no other country starts issuing unilateral mining licenses, because then it really does become an arms race on the seabed.
Thank you, Elisabeth Braw, for sharing such important and timely analysis with us. Joining us and sharing your insights on focal length. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of Focal Length. For more international news and updates, stay tuned on NewsX World.